The city never truly slept. Even in the dead of night, the towering glass monoliths of downtown loomed over the streets like silent sentinels, their windows aglow with artificial light. It was here, in one of the most powerful corporate buildings in the country, that Monica Carter scrubbed floors, emptied trash cans, and wiped down desks where powerful men made million-dollar decisions. She had worked as a night cleaner at Wellington Enterprises for the past 5 years, and in that time, she had become invisible. During the day, the office was alive with activity, executives in designer suits, assistants scurrying under pressure, and interns desperate to prove their worth. But by night, it was Monica's domain. She moved through the empty halls, the rhythmic sound of her mop the only thing keeping her company. Yet, even during the rare occasions when employees stayed late, they never acknowledged her. "Excuse me," she once said when an associate left a chair blocking the hallway. The man didn't even look at her, just shifted the chair with his foot like she was an inconvenience. She had long stopped expecting basic respect. Bradley Wellington, the CEO, was the worst of them all. Tall, sharp-featured, and always impeccably dressed, he strode through the halls like a king surveying his kingdom. To him, Monica and people like her were nothing more than background noise, people who existed to serve. One night, as she was cleaning the conference room, she overheard him laughing with some executives. "I swear," Bradley chuckled, sipping his whiskey. "I walked in, and for a second, I thought one of the janitors had somehow gotten into the boardroom." His colleagues laughed along with him, feeding his ego. Monica clenched her jaw and kept scrubbing. It wasn't just the words, it was the entitlement. The casual way these men dismissed people like her, as if they were beneath notice. But she noticed. She noticed every insult, every condescending glance, every muttered comment. And she carried them with her. Still, Monica wasn't bitter. She had dreams. At the end of long shifts, when exhaustion weighed on her bones, she'd sit in her tiny apartment and sketch out business plans. One day she would own her own cleaning service, one where her workers were treated with dignity, but dreams cost money. And life had never been fair. Tonight, as she finished her shift, exhaustion clung to her shoulders like a heavy coat. She packed up her supplies, grabbed her coat, and stepped outside into the cold. And then she saw her. A frail old woman, shivering in the downpour, clutched a soaked handbag as she tried to take a step forward. Her silver hair was plastered to her forehead, her thin frame trembling violently. Monica's first instinct was to keep walking. The world had taught her that helping strangers could be dangerous, but something about the woman's lost, almost desperate expression tugged at her conscience. With a deep breath, she hurried over. "Ma'am? Are you okay?" The woman turned, startled, her blue eyes wide with confusion. I was looking for a taxi," she stammered, her voice shaking. "But I must have... I don't know where." Monica frowned. The woman was clearly disoriented. "Come inside," she urged. "It's too cold for you to be out here." "I don't want to be a bother," the woman whispered. "You're not." With gentle hands, Monica guided her inside the building and into the small employee lounge, a space barely big enough for a couch, a vending machine, and a coffee maker. She grabbed an extra work jacket from her locker and draped it over the woman's shoulders. "Here, this should help warm you up." The woman sighed in relief, her frail hands gripping the fabric. "Thank you, dear. You're very kind." Monica nodded and turned to make some tea, letting the woman gather herself. "I'm Monica, by the way." The woman smiled weakly. Margaret Wellington. The name meant nothing to Monica. Had she known that the woman sitting in front of her was the mother of Bradley Wellington, the very man who disrespected her daily, she might have hesitated. But at that moment, Margaret wasn't a CEO's mother. She was just a cold, vulnerable woman who needed help. And Monica had always believed in kindness. The warmth of the tea did wonders for Margaret. Her trembling subsided as she took slow, measured sips, her frail fingers wrapped around the cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Monica sat across from her, watching carefully. There was something about the old woman's presence that reminded her of her own grandmother. Gentle but firm. a woman who had lived long enough to see the world shift in ways both beautiful and cruel. After a long, contemplative pause, Margaret sighed. "It's strange," she murmured. "Sometimes life takes you full circle. When I was young, I never thought I'd end up back in this city, sitting in a break room with a stranger, warming up like a lost child." Monica offered a small smile. "Life's funny like that," Margaret nodded. "I grew up in a small town. Back then, things were simpler. We had to work for everything. My father was strict, believed in hard work, honesty, and treating people with respect, no matter their station in life." Monica arched an eyebrow. "Sounds like a good man." "He was," Margaret agreed, staring into her tea as if she could see the past swirling inside. "Which is why it's so disappointing to see how some people turn out." There was a sadness in her voice, something deeper than regret. Monica tilted her head. "You talking about someone in particular?" Margaret hesitated before exhaling deeply. "My son." Monica stiffened slightly but didn't interrupt. "He runs a company now. Wellington Enterprises." Monica's grip on her cup tightened. Margaret shook her head. "I won't pretend I don't love him. He's my child. But he wasn't raised to be cruel. He wasn't raised to be the kind of man who steps on others just because he can." Monica stayed quiet, biting back a bitter laugh. If only she knew. Margaret continued, unaware of Monica's reaction. "I see the way he treats people, like they're beneath him, like their value is measured by their wealth or status. I've spoken to him about it, but he just brushes me off. 'That's business, mother,' he says." Monica's jaw clenched. The words sounded exactly like something Bradley Wellington would say. She stared into her tea for a moment before deciding, "To hell with it. You know, I work for Wellington Enterprises." Margaret looked up, surprised. "You do?" Monica nodded, her voice calm but edged with something sharp. "As a cleaner." A flicker of discomfort passed over Margaret's face. "I see how your son treats people like me," Monica continued, her voice low. "He doesn't acknowledge us, doesn't even look at us. And when he does, it's with disgust, like we're something stuck to the bottom of his shoe." Margaret's face paled. "I've heard him joke about us, laugh with his friends about how people like me don't belong in places like that. I've seen him refuse to speak directly to janitors, like we're not even worth the air." Margaret's fingers trembled against the porcelain cup. I'm used to it," Monica interrupted, her tone bitter. "People like your son, they don't think twice about folks like me. They never have to." The silence was thick, heavy, unforgiving. Then Margaret's eyes drifted to the far wall, where a framed photograph hung, a portrait of Bradley Wellington, smiling smugly in a tailored suit. Her breath hitched. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair. "Bradley," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Monica followed her gaze, confused, until Margaret turned back to her with tears welling in her eyes. "That's my son," she whispered. For a moment, Monica's breath caught in her throat. Then everything inside her went cold. Margaret Wellington. Bradley Wellington's mother. The same man who made her life miserable. The same man who treated her as if she were nothing. Monica had saved his mother. Her stomach twisted. She pushed her chair back slightly, needing space. Margaret reached for her, eyes pleading. Monica stood abruptly. "You didn't tell me." Margaret flinched. I didn't know you worked for him." I swear, Monica let out a hollow laugh. "Wow, just wow." She ran a hand through her curls, pacing. "I just sat here and told you everything about your son. And you," she exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Margaret looked devastated. "Monica, please. I never wanted to deceive you." Monica crossed her arms. "And now what? You go home, tell your son about the nice little black janitor who gave you tea?" Margaret flinched. Monica shook her head, the weight of exhaustion pressing down. She had done something good tonight. She had helped. And now, even that felt like a cruel joke. "I should go," she muttered, turning away. But then Margaret's voice cracked. "Monica, wait." There was something so raw, so pained in her tone that it stopped Monica in her tracks. Margaret's shoulders shook as she wiped at her eyes. "I didn't raise him to be this way." Her voice broke. I didn't raise him to be a man who would hurt people, and yet, I look at him now, and I barely recognize him. Monica remained silent, watching her. Margaret took a shuddering breath. I can't change the past, but I can tell you this. I won't let this stand. Monica frowned. What do you mean? Margaret straightened in her chair, her old frailty replaced by something powerful. Bradley thinks he owns the world. He thinks he can treat people like they're disposable. But he's about to learn that he answers to me. Monica studied her carefully. She had seen powerful people talk before, but Margaret's expression held something different, something dangerous. Tomorrow, Margaret declared, steel in her voice, I'm going to make my son answer for the man he's become. And for the first time that night, Monica felt something new flicker in her chest. Hope. The next morning, Wellington Enterprises buzzed with its usual air of self-importance. Executives in crisp suits strode through the halls, assistants juggled coffee orders, and interns scrambled to impress anyone with a title. None of them knew that today was going to be different. Today, the kingdom of Bradley Wellington was about to crumble. Margaret Wellington walked through the gleaming glass doors of the corporate headquarters, her frail frame belying the storm brewing behind her eyes. She had called ahead, demanding a meeting. And when Margaret Wellington demanded something, people listened. Bradley sat in the boardroom, lounging in his executive chair, oblivious to what was coming. His top executives lined the table, murmuring about the urgent meeting he had been forced to attend. The doors swung open, and Margaret stepped inside. The room fell silent. Bradley's eyes flickered with annoyance. Mother, what are you doing here? Margaret's lips curled into something dangerous. I needed to have a word with you, and I wanted your executives to hear it too. She stepped aside. Monica Carter walked in. A ripple of confusion spread through the boardroom. Some executives exchanged wary glances. Why was a janitor standing in the most powerful room in the company? Bradley's expression darkened. What the hell is this? Margaret took a slow breath, gripping the back of a chair. Bradley, do you know what I was doing last night? He frowned. What? I was alone in the rain, lost and freezing. I could have collapsed. I could have died. The voice trembled. And do you know who helped me? She turned toward Monica. This woman, Monica Carter, one of your employees. Bradley stiffened. His gaze flickered toward Monica, and for the first time in his life, he actually looked at her. Margaret's voice rang through the room, clear and unshakable. While my own son was too busy reveling in his own power, a woman you treat as invisible was the one who saved me. The executives sat in stunned silence. Margaret turned to Monica. Tell them, dear. Tell them exactly what my son thinks of people like you. Monica's heart pounded. Every instinct told her to walk away, to protect herself. But then she saw Bradley's face, that smug, entitled expression. She squared her shoulders. I've worked here for 5 years, Monica began, her voice calm but steady. And in that time, your CEO has never spoken to me, never looked at me. But I've heard him. I've heard the way he talks about people like me, how we're beneath him. Bradley's expression twisted. This is ridiculous. Margaret ignored him. And what else, Monica? Monica swallowed, then met Bradley's gaze. I didn't know who Margaret was when I helped her. I didn't care, because she was a human being who needed help. But you? She tilted her head. You wouldn't have even looked at me if I was the one struggling in the rain. Silence. Margaret inhaled sharply, then turned to her son. Bradley, I am ashamed of you. A flicker of panic crossed his face. Mother, no. She lifted a trembling finger. I will not be dismissed. Not this time. The tension in the room was suffocating. Margaret took a step forward, her voice suddenly lethal. Let me be very clear, she said, steel laced in every word. I have had enough of the way you run this company. Enough of your arrogance. Enough of your blatant racism. The executives shifted uncomfortably. Some of them had witnessed Bradley's behavior firsthand, but no one had ever dared to call him out. Until now. Bradley laughed, the sound hollow. Mother, you're being dramatic. Margaret's lips curled. Am I? She reached into her purse, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and slammed them onto the table. Do you know what these are? She asked. her voice dangerously calm. Bradley's jaw tightened. I don't have time for games. These are revisions to my will. The air in the room cracked like thunder. Margaret's gaze bore into her son. If you don't change, if you don't start treating the people who work for you with the respect and dignity they deserve, I will strip you of everything. Bradley's cocky smirk vanished. You can't be serious, he said, his voice lower now. Margaret folded her arms. Try me. The executives sat frozen, watching the powerful CEO shrink before his mother. Margaret turned to Monica. And as for you, dear, she softened, taking Monica's hands. You deserve more than this place. But if you'll allow me, I want to make things right. Monica blinked, confused. What do you mean? Margaret turned back to the board. I want an immediate review of company policies. I want to know exactly how employees at every level are being treated. And I want Monica promoted to a position where she has actual power. Monica's breath hitched. Mrs. Wellington, Margaret smiled warmly. You don't have to accept, my dear, but consider it a stepping stone to whatever future you want. Bradley stood, his face red with humiliation. You can't just waltz in here and... Margaret turned to him, her voice like a blade. I can. And I just did. Bradley stood there, his entire world crumbling in front of him. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. The control he had over this company, over the people he looked down on, it was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The boardroom was still humming with whispers long after Margaret Wellington walked out, leaving her son in stunned silence. Monica followed behind her, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle into her bones. Power had shifted right in front of her eyes, but she refused to let herself get caught up in the moment. She had lived long enough to know that power, respect, and even opportunities weren't handed out freely, especially not to people like her. So when Margaret turned to her in the hallway, her warm blue eyes filled with both shame and admiration, Monica was already prepared for what came next. Monica, Margaret began, reaching for her hand. I want to do more than apologize. I want to make sure you never have to be treated like that again. Monica pulled back gently, exhaling. Mrs. Wellington, I appreciate what you did in there, but I don't need your charity. Margaret chuckled softly. I would never insult you like that. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. I spoke with the board before I walked in, she explained. There's a new management position opening in the facilities department. It comes with a significant salary increase, benefits, and a say in company operations. Monica's lips pressed together. And you want me to take it? I want you to have options, Margaret corrected. I know you have bigger dreams. I just want to help you get there. Monica studied the card. The offer was tempting. More money, more stability, and a real seat at the table. But it wasn't what she wanted. She had spent years cleaning up after men like Bradley Wellington. She wasn't about to waste more time managing their messes. Instead, she smiled, slipping the card into her pocket. I appreciate it, she said sincerely. But I have a better idea. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Oh? Monica took a deep breath. The words tasted bold on her tongue, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready. I want to start my own cleaning business. Margaret's face lit up. Monica continued. I've been saving, planning, but I never had the security to actually do it. If you really want to help me... She paused, considering her next words. Then become my first client. Margaret's smile spread slowly, then turned into a full, proud grin. Now that, she said, is the best idea I've heard all day. Months later, the crisp autumn air carried the scent of fresh beginnings. Monica adjusted the gold nameplate on the glass door of her brand new office. Carter's Cleaning and Facilities Management. She stepped back, letting the pride settle deep in her chest. She had done this, without groveling, without begging, without giving a single damn about what Bradley Wellington thought of her. Her company had dozens of contracts lined up, including one with Wellington Enterprises. Margaret had kept her word. Her name alone had opened doors that were once slammed shut in Monica's face. But make no mistake, this wasn't a handout. Monica had earned every inch of this success. She ran her company with integrity, hiring workers who were often overlooked, paying them fair wages, and ensuring no one felt as invisible as she once had. And Bradley? Well, he had been forced to make some changes. Margaret made sure of it. Company policies were restructured, diversity and inclusion programs were put in place, and several top executives had been fired for their blatant discrimination. But Bradley himself? He hadn't changed. Not really. Oh, he had learned how to fake it, learned to bite his tongue in meetings, to put on a more polished, inclusive image when necessary. But Monica could see the truth written all over him. He was bitter. And that was the difference between them. Monica had evolved, risen above the system that tried to keep her down. But Bradley, he was still trapped in his own arrogance, choking on the realization that he wasn't untouchable anymore. Monica didn't waste another second thinking about him. Her life was so much bigger now. She walked into her new office, head held high, heart light. Because for the first time in her life she knew, without a doubt, she had won.